Go.
Om Tapakathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibidiritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuviganantiye Bhurida Janaha. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Take 3. Welcome to our ongoing class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. As usual, we'll be discussing Swami Nikhanandaji's wonderful English translation, but also comparing it with the original Bengali Kathamrita. And I'll be, as usual, pointing out some places where there might be some discrepancies or differences between the two texts. We are continuing our discussion of the entry from Thursday, August 24th, 1882. We're about a third of the way into it. So let me begin. As evening came on, the temples were lighted up. Sri Ramakrishna was seated on a small couch, meditating on the Divine Mother. Then he chanted the names of God. Incense was burnt in the room, where an oil lamp had been lighted. Sounds of conch shells and gongs came floating on the air as the evening worship began in the temple of Kali. The light of the moon flooded all the quarters. The master again spoke to M. Master, perform your duties in an unselfish spirit. The work that Vidyasagar is engaged in is very good. Always try to perform your duties without desiring any result. M. Yes, sir. But may I know if one can realize God while performing one's duties? Can Rama and desire coexist? The other day I read in a Hindi couplet, where Rama is, there desire cannot be. Where desire is, there Rama cannot be. So in the original Bangla, there's a rhyme on Rama and desire. Actually, the word is Kam. So Ram and Kam. Ram and Kam cannot go together. You either have Ram or you have Kam. Should remind you of something from the Bible. You can choose, you can choose God or Mammon, but not both. Mammon meaning worldliness. Master, all without exception perform work. Even to chant the name and glories of God is work, as is the meditation of the non-dualist on I am He. It's a very interesting point. Breathing is also an activity. There is no way of renouncing work altogether. So do your work, but surrender the result to God. M. Sir, may I make an effort to earn more money? Master, it is permissible to do so to maintain a religious family. The Bangla here is interesting. Biddhar Shongshar, a samsara of vidya. So literally it means like a samsara of knowledge. Religious family, I don't know, spiritual family, or a kind of spiritually oriented household, maybe, something like that, I would say, is probably a better translation. A spiritually oriented household. If you want to earn more money for the sake of a spiritually oriented household and with spiritual aims, then that could be perfectly fine. That seems to be what he's saying. It is permissible to do so to maintain a spiritually oriented household. You may try to increase your income, but in an honest way. The goal of life is not the earning of money, but the service of God. Money is not harmful if it is devoted to the service of God. M. How long should a man feel obliged to do his duty toward his wife and children? Master, as long as they feel pinched for food and clothing. But one need not take the responsibility of a son when he is able to support himself. When the young fledgling learns to pick its own food, its mother pecks it if it comes to her for food. M. How long must one do one's duty? The word for duty here is karma, which is interesting. Master, the blossom drops off when the fruit appears. One doesn't have to do one's duty after the attainment of God, nor does one feel like doing it then. If a drunkard takes too much liquor, he cannot retain consciousness. If he takes only 2 or 3 glasses, he can go on with his work. As you advance nearer and nearer to God, he will reduce your activities little by little. Have no fear. Finish the few duties you have at hand, and then you will have peace. When the mistress of the house goes to bathe after finishing her cooking and other household duties, she won't come back. However, you may shout after her. Pause. Let's pause here. Okay, I forgot to mention, I said I'm a third of the way into this entry from August 24th, 1882. It's actually the start of a new chapter in the original Bangla. It's chapter 3, Tritiya Parichhed, and M gives it a suggestive title, Guru Shishya Sambad Gujya Katha. Guru Shishya Sambad means a dialogue between Guru and disciple, and Gujya Katha means literally secret talk. Sri Ramakrishna will sometimes say very intimate spiritual things only to his inner circle of very intimate disciples. And there's an open question of what particular teachings M might have had in mind when he's referring to these secret teachings. I suspect that what he has in mind is, it comes a bit later in the chapter when M asks him, how do we realize God? How do we have vision of God, darshan of God? And Sri Ramakrishna's answer is, and can we see God with our own eyes, physical eyes? He says, no, you need to develop a love body. And then through love eyes, you can see God. Through love ears, you can hear the words of God, and so on and so forth. So that might be what he was getting at. Now, so let's begin to analyze a bit here. There's a lot here to unpack. First of all, Vijay asked an interesting question. The translation makes it seem as if the arati is going on, Sri Ramakrishna is sitting in his room, M is also sitting there, and then while the arati is going on, he's talking to M. But that's not actually what's happening. There are a couple sentences omitted in the translation. So let me read those omitted sentences. So right after arati, this is said, Aratir kiyokkon pore Sri Ramakrishna choto khatite boshiya monir shohit ekaki nana bishoye kotha koitechen. Moni mejete boshiya. A little bit after the arati ended, then Sri Ramakrishna, sitting on that same bed that he was already, that same cot that he was sitting on, started talking to M about many different spiritual topics. And M is also sitting there in the same room. So that's the idea. Arati happens, Sri Ramakrishna is quietly taking mother's name as he listens to the Arati and as M listens. After the Arati, they start speaking. Okay? Now, right after that's stated in the Bengali, M starts a new section, and he gives the section a title which is from Bhagavad Gita 2.47, Karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, which means to work you have the right, but not to the fruits thereof. A very famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Now, so this whole first topic is karma yoga. How work itself can be a spiritual practice if you do it with the right attitude, if you do it with the spiritual attitude. But the details of the conversation, I think, are really interesting and very practically relevant to us even now. First of all, let's look at M. M says, but may I know if one can realize God while performing one's duties? He's a householder, and he's always doubting himself, and sometimes he's even entertaining the possibility of becoming a sannyasi. Sometimes some householders, they, in a momentary spirit of vairagya, they say, I'm sick of all this, I want to become a monk. And they see us hanging out here, enjoying ourselves, they think monastic life is nice and easy. So, okay, so M is kind of like thinking like that. And he kind of wants Sri Ramakrishna to say, yeah, I mean, it's the second best thing to just do work. But he doesn't, and M, let's look at his intuition. Can Rama and Kama, can Rama and desire coexist? What's the assumption here? The assumption is all work is based on Kama, on desire. You can't work unless there's some desire. And this is a kind of, it's an understandable intuition, right? Why would you do something unless you have a reason for doing it, unless you have there has to be some desire driving you to do something. I'm hungry, I have a desire to eat, therefore I open the fridge and I get something, or I cook something if I'm not lazy. Right? That's the idea. And this reminds me also of Shankara's famous formula. This occurs many, many times in his Sanskrit commentaries. There's a formula, 3 words. Can anyone guess where I'm going with this?
Avidya, and then karma, punarjanma, or avidya, kama, karma,
That's
punarjanma.
Okay, no, avidya, kama, karma. That's it, that's the formula. Avidya, kama, karma. It's a samasa, it's a compound word. At the root of everything is avidya, ignorance. Ignorance of what? Non-dual Brahman. Our true nature is non-dual Brahman. As a result of that ignorance, what happens? We have desires. Because we identify with this body-mind complex, or with the individual soul. Right? As a result of those desires, we engage in karma. So avidya, kama, karma. At the root of everything, ignorance. As a result of ignorance comes desire. Desires result in the desire to engage in action. So M seems to have this kind of intuition. All work is tainted by desire. Sri Ramakrishna refutes that position. And he says there's such a thing as nishkama karma. Engage in desireless action. Which to M sounds like kind of contradictory, like an oxymoron. But Sri Ramakrishna says no. And in fact, he says something very deep here. All kinds of spiritual practice is a kind of work. Remember, work is not just physical action. I'm moving my limbs and this and that. Mental action, thinking, is itself karma. Any bodily, mental, verbal action falls under karma. What does that mean? It has very interesting implications. So all without exception perform work. This should remind us of another famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Gita quiz, chapter 3. For those of you in my Gita class, come on guys. 3.5. Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatu tishtati akarmakrit. Not even for a single moment can a human being live without engaging in some form of action. I think this is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna has in mind. Breathing, he says, is an action. Jnana yoga, this is interesting. He says this meditation on the fact that you are non-dual pure consciousness, which is the main practice taught in Shankara's school of classical Advaita Vedanta. That's the path of knowledge. Ironically, Sri Ramakrishna is saying that path of knowledge is also it's a kind of karma. Why is that interesting or ironic? Because what Shankara says is, karma yoga is a preparatory discipline for people who have impure minds. So through karma yoga, we purify the mind. And then we stop engaging in karma yoga, and then we practice the path of knowledge alone. And now Sri Ramakrishna is saying the path of knowledge itself is actually karma. And so better to practice jnana yoga as karma yoga by renouncing the fruits. So that you should try to practice jnana yoga in the nishkama way. And then that jnana yoga becomes karma yoga. It's a very interesting idea. Okay. And then, even more interesting, M asks a very interesting question, which I hear this a lot in different forms. M, sir, may I make an effort to earn more money? This is common because a lot of people come to the temple who talk to monks are professionals. They work in companies, and they're slowly climbing up the ladder, or they want to climb up the ladder, and then they're also spiritual aspirants. Sometimes they feel a little guilty about it. You know, is it unspiritual for me to have these ambitions, to get a promotion, to get a raise, to want to impress my boss, and so on and so forth? Last week I was at USC. I'm a Hindu chaplain there, and the topic of the class was the art of karma yoga. And there are these very driven students, grad students mainly, and they just finished an internship at LinkedIn or something like that, and so we got in a really interesting discussion of ambition and the question of the place of ambition in spiritual life, if there is any. So I think this is a way of reframing M's question. May I make an effort to earn more money? That's a form of ambition, one can say, right? Arguably. One can also ask, like, is it okay for me as a spiritual aspirant to apply for a promotion in my company, for instance? So, let's talk about ambition, because I think there's quite a bit to say here. First of all, what is ambition? The best thing is to look it up in the dictionary, and so I did. Ambition is defined as a strong desire to do or achieve something. A strong desire to achieve or do something. So now, with that as our definition of ambition, this is a question for you guys, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. Is ambition compatible with spiritual life and spiritual practice? So anyone could we have a mic that we can take? Who wants to answer the question? Anybody?
I have a question.
Okay, she has a question instead of an answer. Can you pass it to Hilda?
So my desire for enlightenment,
Yeah.
is that an ambition? Does that come under ambition?
Yeah, it's a great question. When people ask Sri Ramakrishna this question, like the desire for God, doesn't that fall under desire as well? What he says is there's desire and there's desire. there's desire for worldly things, and then there's spiritual desires. And he says that if you have a spiritual desire, it'll help you to negate the worldly desires and help you to attain the highest goal of life. So in the Vedantic context, the term is mumukshutva, intense longing for moksha, for liberation. That's a good thing. That's one of the sadhana chatushtaya. That's one of the fourfold, that's a crucial part of this fourfold sadhana. The bhakti equivalent of mumukshutva is a term used by Sri Ramakrishna all the time. Vyakulata. Intense longing for God. It's a desire, but it's a desire for God. Mumukshutva. It's a very strong desire, but it's a desire for liberation. So there's a fundamental difference between worldly desires and desire for spiritual attainments. That would be the answer. But you can follow up if you want. Yeah.
If everything is God, ambition also, or my desire to work also falls under the realm of God.
You mean God is the one desiring in a sense? Is that what you mean? Or
where am I getting this desire from? Maybe different modes acting within me. That's where I'm getting that.
I see. Well, so you mean like there's no free will, God is a doer. Is that the idea? So that in a sense, God is the one desiring through us? Yeah, maybe. So there's a big issue of free will. I mean, there are a lot of things here. In this text, Sri Ramakrishna also often talks about free will and says, at the end of the day, we have no free will. God alone is a doer. And so your question could be framed as, if God alone is a doer, then when I have a strong ambition to get a promotion or a raise, then it's actually God who's desiring through me, right? Right. So that's in a sense it's true, but on the other hand, Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on free will and determinism are a little bit more nuanced than that. Because the point is, he says, until you have realized God, you can't help but feel that you are free, and therefore morally responsible for your actions. And even if you intellectually tell yourself that, oh, it's really God who's working through me, the moment you get up from your chair, it's not going to feel as if God is making you get up from the chair, but actually that you are getting up. Which means you're going to have an illusion of free will and moral responsibility so long as you have not realized God. And if we're all here as non-realized souls, then that's a standpoint from which we should be operating. So that would be one way of answering that. Okay. But coming back to ambition now. So the question again is ambition understood as a strong desire to do or achieve something, is it compatible with spiritual life? Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, Keshav?
I feel like prima facie, they're kind of at an odds with each other.
Why?
If you approach it in a way that is like separate from God, but if you approach every act of doing as a practice of like karma yoga, like a promotion is going to have struggle and strife in the same way as maintaining whatever your current position might be. So then it's a change in status, but not like a change in struggle. And that doesn't necessarily have to affect your relationship with God. And so you can understand that like you're still doing, and any struggle that comes about from doing is still like a part of the process of karma yoga. And by understanding it that way, you can like understand it as a practice and eventually undoing.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, see, by definition, I think ambition is at odds with spiritual life. If you understand ambition as a strong desire to achieve or do something. Why? Because it means that you have a strong desire for the fruits of your actions, as far as I can tell. Unless I'm misunderstanding the definition, or you can give a different understanding of this definition. But literally, a strong desire to do or achieve something means you really want to do something. What does that mean? It means you're attached to the work itself. You really have a strong desire to achieve something, it means you're strongly attached to the fruits. But, so now let's take the case of M's question. May I make an effort to earn more money? So if it's ambition that's driving him to earn more money, what does it mean? It means I really want to earn more money. And if I'm not able to succeed in that, what'll happen? I become unhappy, depressed, dejected, right? That's the test. But if I try to earn more money, look, interesting, Sri Ramakrishna's answer is not, no, you shouldn't earn more money. He didn't say that. He said it's fine to try to earn more money for a spiritually oriented household, so long as your primary motivation, your inner attitude, is free from attachment either to the work itself or to the fruits of the work. And then you might ask, well, then what would the motive be? He says, in order to serve God. If the motivation for earning more money, for getting the promotion, is to serve God, then that becomes karma yoga, it becomes nishkama karma. And the test is, if you don't succeed, how are you affected, if at all? And to the extent that you're not affected, the more of a karma yogi you are. And there are a few things here. One, it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not that your desire to earn more money or to get a promotion is either 100% pure selfish ambition, worldly ambition, or 100% karma yoga, pure, I have a 100% desire to serve God. Usually we fall somewhere in between. There's some percentage of both. 50-50, 75-25. And what is spiritual life? Spiritual progress means if in the beginning it's 90% ambition and 10% seva bhava, this desire to serve God, as we progress in the spiritual path, what happens? It becomes more like 75-25 ambition versus the desire to serve God, 50-50, and then it gets 25-75 and so on and so forth. That's the ideal. Slow but steady progress. Another thing is, I think the definition of ambition is important because a lot of people, they have some other vaguer or different definition of ambition in mind and say, no, ambition is compatible with spiritual life, but they mean something very different. But I think that in English, ambition tends to have a negative connotation. And not necessarily a negative connotation, but at least in the spiritual context. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite letters of all time, Swamiji, you know where I'm getting. He wrote this letter on 18th April 1900 to Josephine MacLeod. It's an extraordinary letter. If you're even a little spiritually receptive, reading the letter itself is very spiritually elevating. He makes this extraordinary statement there. He says, 1900, 2 years before he leaves his body, behind my work was ambition. Behind my love was personality. Behind my purity was fear. Behind my guidance, the thirst of power. Now they are vanishing, and I drift. I come, mother, I come. In thy warm bosom, floating wheresoever thou takest me, in the voiceless, in the strange, in the wonderland, I come. A spectator, no more an actor. The letter goes on like that. It's an extraordinary letter. But anyway, I wanted to mention it because this is Swamiji, somebody of his spiritual caliber, looking back on his preaching in the 1890s, in the West primarily. Behind my work was ambition. Ordinary people can say that. Somebody with lucidity and honesty might say that. Swamiji, what kind of ambition could he have? Any thoughts on this? And it's not just that. Behind my love was personality, which means it's supposed to be completely detached, universal love. You love God and all beings, Shiva, Jnana, Jiva, Seva. Personality. Behind my purity was fear. How can somebody beyond the possibility of impurity have fear? And so on and so forth. The way I understand this is Kashipur. The way I see it is Naren, Sri Ramakrishna one day, he grants to Naren the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. When Naren loses the even consciousness of his own external body. He says, what happened to my body? I don't have any body. And he starts freaking out. And then Sri Ramakrishna tells him later, I've kept this experience under lock and key because you have to do mother's work. And until you have finished mother's work, I'll keep it under lock and key. Once you're done with it, I'll reopen it, and then you'll have that experience again. And so the way I see it is that Sri Ramakrishna, in order to make Swamiji do all the work that he needed to do, kept a slight veil of maya, ignorance, whatever you want to call it, so that he could do the work that he needed to do. And that's what Swamiji notices at the tail end of his life, 2 years before he leaves his body. Anyway, but behind my work was ambition. So ambition, it just strikes me that ambition here is, first of all, in Swamiji's case, he's talking about like in very subtle, infinitesimal kind of traces of these things, of these worldly qualities. Unlike us, we're struggling with much grosser forms of the same thing. But secondly is ambition by definition, I think, is antithetical to karma yoga. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive to get a promotion or strive to make more money. It all depends on spiritualizing, purifying your inner attitude. That's the most important thing. What Sri Ramakrishna says again and again is you need to make sure that your attitude behind it is the desire to serve God. How do we know? Pray. Prayer is very helpful. The moment that desire arises in your mind to apply for a promotion, for instance, or to apply for a salary raise, what should you do? Take it to God. Most people take it to their husband, to their friend, and say, do you think I should go through with this? No, go straight to God and ask God. Oh Lord, I have this desire has arisen in my mind. Is this spiritually beneficial for me? Should I do it? Now, for most people, God is not going to just give a straight answer because we don't have this direct line of communication with God, unfortunately. Some of you might, if you're lucky. But what I find is, through sincere prayer, some light comes. Not a direct answer, but some light, some clarity, if you pray very sincerely. How do you know you're praying sincerely? Sri Ramakrishna gives a test, with tears in your eyes. And he means it literally. And then some clarity comes. I think prayer is very helpful. Okay, and finally, toward the end of the passage that I just read, M asks, how long must one do one's duty? And the term here is karma. And then Sri Ramakrishna he says, the blossom drops off when the fruit appears. One doesn't have to do one's duty after the attainment of God, nor does one feel like doing it then. So the term is karma. And the term karma is used earlier as well to include all kinds of activities, mental and physical, right? So here, I think Niklanji is right in rendering, because one could also say, how long must one do work? Because if the word is karma, one could translate it that way. But I think this is more plausible. The reason being, Sri Ramakrishna has just said, nobody can live for a single moment without working in some way, right? So it has to be a special kind of work. So I think that Niklanji is right in translating it as one's duty. Household duties, I think that's what M really has in mind. How long do I have to look after my family? How long do I have to earn a living? And so on and so forth. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, so long as you have not realized God or made very substantial spiritual progress. Now, he also says, as you advance nearer and nearer to God, he will reduce your activities. She, let's replace he with she as usual. She will reduce your activities little by little. Have no fear. At this point in the Bengali, several sentences are omitted. Can you guess what's omitted? People who are experts in the gospel? This is what analogy will he use to explain this exact thing? As you advance nearer and nearer to God, he will reduce your activities little by little. Here it is. গৃহস্থের বউ অন্তঃসত্ত্বা হলে শাশুড়ি ক্রমে ক্রমে কর্ম কমিয়ে দেয় 10 মাস হলে আদপে কর্ম করতে দেয় না ছেলেটি হলে ওইটিকে নিয়ে নাড়াচাড়া করে 3 sentences all omitted from the English translation. When the daughter-in-law is pregnant, what happens? The mother-in-law starts slowly reducing that daughter-in-law's work in the household. Okay, you don't have to cook anymore. So on and so forth. Until what happens? 10 mash hole. We usually think 9 months of pregnancy, but here's 10 mash, 10 months of pregnancy. After 10 months of pregnancy, adobe kormo korte dey na. Mother-in-law says, enough, no work, stop working altogether. Now focus on delivering the kid. And then cheleti hole oitiki niye narachara kore. Once the kid is born, what happens? The mother of the kid is completely absorbed in just raising the kid and looking after this young baby, right? Which means what? All those household duties stop. That's the idea. And I think it's important that, I don't know why the analogy was left out, but it's significant. Okay. So now, let's continue another series of very interesting questions from M. M. Sir, what is the meaning of the realization of God? What do you mean by God vision? How does one attain it? 3 questions, power-packed questions. Number 1, what is the meaning of the realization of God? The Bangla here is very important. Let me read the whole question. Muni. Actually, before that, this is the start of a new section in the original Bengali. The section is called Ishwar Labh or Ishwar Darshan Ki, Upay Ki. He's giving the 3 questions in the section title. Number 1, what is Ishvara Labha? L-A-B-H-A. It literally means acquisition or attainment. What is Ishwar Labh? Ishwar Darshan Ki. What is Ishwar Darshan? Darshana. What is the vision of God? That's the second question. Third, Upay Ki. And how do we attain the realization of God? Okay? So now, then, Muni, the master. This is the original Bengali. Agga, meaning sir. Ishwar Labhed mane ki. So see, God realization is a rendering, the English translation of Ishwar Labh, Ishvara Labha. Okay? The attainment of God. Then second, Ar Ishwar Darshan kake bole. That's the translation. The translation here is, what do you mean by God vision? God vision is Ishvara Darshana. Okay? Ishwar Darshan. And kemon kore hoy? And how do we attain either God realization or God vision? 3 very important questions. In what follows, Swami gives a detailed answer to all 3 of these questions, but not exactly in that order. He answers number 1 first, number 3 second, and number 2 third. If that's not confusing enough. Okay, but we'll take it one step at a time. We may not even cover all 3 answers today. We'll continue next Wednesday, by the way. Heads up. Next gospel class is next Wednesday. Okay. So now, Sri Ramakrishna, first answering M's question about Ishvara Labha, God realization. And it's somewhat of an indirect answer. It's very interesting and very deep. Sri Ramakrishna. According to the Vaishnavas, the aspirants and the seers of God may be divided into different groups. Already there's a translation issue here. The seers of God. You might think, oh, then he's answering the second question about God vision, right? Seers of God. But what's the original? Vaishnavra bole je Ishwarer pothe jara jacche, those are people who are following the Vaishnava path, spiritual aspirants. Ar jara tanke labh koreche, labh. Actually, he's answering the first question. Remember, the first question M is asking is about Ishvara Labha. Second one is Ishwar Darshan. And Nikalanji's translation is the seers of God. I think that pushes it closer to as if it's an answer to the second question, but I don't think it is. It's an answer to Ishvara Labha. Okay? People who have actually realized God. So I would translate this as, according to the Vaishnavas, the aspirants, spiritual aspirants, and those who have realized God, okay, may be divided into different groups. These are the 4 categories: Pravartaka, Sadhaka, Siddha, and the Siddha of the Siddha. Okay? He who has just set foot on the path may be called a Pravartaka. He may be called a Sadhaka, who has for some time been practicing spiritual disciplines such as worship, japa, meditation, and the chanting of God's name and glories. He may be called a Siddha, which literally means a perfected person, who has known from his inner experience that God exists. And then he gives a beautiful analogy. An analogy is given in the Vedanta to explain this. The master of the house is asleep in a dark room. Someone is groping in the darkness to find him. He touches the couch and says, no, it is not he. He touches the window and says, no, it is not he. He touches the door and says, no, it is not he. This is known in the Vedanta as the process of neti, not this. One small correction. In the original Bangla, it's neti. Because he's negating all 3 of the things, right? He mentioned 3 items. Couch, window, door. Okay. At last his hand touches the master's body and he exclaims, here he is. In other words, he is now conscious of the existence of the master. He has found him, but he doesn't yet know him intimately. There is another type known as a Siddha of the Siddha, the supremely perfect. It is quite a different thing when one talks to the master intimately, when one knows God very intimately through love and devotion. Prema Bhakti is the Bangla. A Siddha has undoubtedly attained God, so that's the 3rd category. But the supremely perfect, the Siddha of the Siddha, has known God very intimately. So let's pause here. A lot is packed into this. 4 categories. First 2, relatively straightforward. Pravartaka, the person who's just starting on the path of spiritual life. Second, the sadhaka, obvious, spiritual aspirant. But the last 2 categories, extremely interesting. Siddha, you think that Siddha is enough. You've attained perfection. What more is there beyond perfection? Perfection is perfection. No, there's Siddha of the Siddha. There's supreme perfection or an even greater perfection than ordinary perfection. This reminds me of a very interesting and tricky, cryptic verse in the Bhagavad Gita, which we talked about recently in our Gita class. Anyone know? Come on, guys. Well, you are not there. Chapter 7, 7.3. Manushanam sahasreshu kaschid yatiti siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mam beti tatpataha. Among hundreds of thousands of people, only a few, Krishna says, strive after me. Or strive after perfection, strive for perfection, siddhi. There are only a few who strive for siddhi, for perfection, the same term used by Sri Ramakrishna. But then it gets even more interesting. Second line. Yatatam api siddhanam, even among those strivers, that tiny minority of strivers, who actually attain siddhi, who attain perfection, yatatam api siddhanam, they're siddhas. Third category. Kaschin mam veti tatvataha. Only a tiny minority of that tiny minority realize me, attain me. So here in that second line, Krishna seems to be distinguishing between the siddhas and the siddhas of the siddhas. And Sri Aurobindo, in his commentary on the Gita, called Essays on the Gita, he interprets this verse in the light of Sri Ramakrishna, maybe even having this kind of teaching in mind of Sri Ramakrishna's. And he says the only way to understand this is that there are 2 categories, 2 levels of spiritual perfection. And in fact, Gita gives them names in the same chapter just before that, because this is 7.3. But in 7.1 and 2, Krishna uses 2 terms, jnana and vijnana. And Sri Aurobindo says that level of just siddhi, spiritual perfection, corresponds to what the Gita calls jnana. And this even greater perfection, more perfect perfection, is what Gita refers to as vijnana. And what is jnana and what is vijnana? Sri Aurobindo interprets those terms in terms of what Sri Ramakrishna says about jnana and vijnana. So when Sri Ramakrishna talks about these 3rd and 4th categories, the siddha and then the siddha of the siddha, they, I think, very clearly map onto the jnani and the vijnani. Okay, and these teachings come up all throughout the gospel. What does he say about the jnani and the vijnani? Most of you have heard this ad nauseum from me, but I'm going to, at the risk of boring you, I'll say it briefly. He says, when you try to get to the roof of a house, what do? You climb a staircase. As you pass each step, you say, not this, not this. Brahman is not this world, Brahman is not this laptop, Brahman is not this body, Brahman is not this mind, until you reach the roof. What does the roof signify? Knowledge of non-dual pure consciousness in the state of nirvikalpa samadhi. That's jnana. Sri Ramakrishna says, that person has attained jnana. That's siddhi. Okay? Then he says, but there are some people, typically Ishvara kotis, a special category of soul, who are divinely commissioned, who after reaching the roof, they look back on the staircase which they just climbed and say, wait a minute, but now I realize that the stairs are made of the same material as the roof. Bricks, lime, and brick dust. That is the vijnani. And Sri Ramakrishna says the vijnani, after attaining jnana, realizes that reality which is nirguna, which he has realized in the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, is also saguna. Brahman and Shakti are non-different. And that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. And so Sri Ramakrishna would often say, whereas the jnani looks upon this world as a framework of illusion, as mithya, as a dream, the vijnani looks upon it as a mansion of mirth, as a blissful but fully real manifestation of the divine. Okay? That's the siddha of the siddha, the vijnani. And because you'll find that Sri Ramakrishna uses exactly the same language to explain the vijnani as he does to explain the siddha of the siddha. Because he says, what is special about the siddha of the siddha? He knows God intimately. He talks to him. This is exactly how he defines the vijnani. Bishesh rupe jana. Bishesh rupe jana means you know the divine intimately. Bishesh rupa. And that's what the V functions as in Sanskrit. Jnana is knowledge. It's full-blown spiritual knowledge. It's realization of the non-dual self. But Vijnana is, V acts as it's an upasarga, it's a prefix, which is an intensifier grammatically. It's an even deeper knowledge. It's a more comprehensive knowledge, a more intimate knowledge. That's the idea. Okay? So here I think is packed a lot of profound philosophical and spiritual wisdom, and you can make connections with the Bhagavad Gita and many other things. Okay, so we get to, I'm going to read the next bit. This is Sri Ramakrishna's answer to, okay, so actually, now recapping. Remember, M's first question is, what is the meaning of the realization of God? So what does Ishvara Labha mean? And Sri Ramakrishna gives an interesting answer. The way I would summarize it is, he says, well, it can mean one of two things. The third category of Siddhi is a kind of God realization. But there's an even more expansive and intimate realization of God, which is what is attained by the Siddha of the Siddha, the supremely perfect being. So there are he's distinguishing two kinds of God realization. Both will give you liberation, but in the latter, you get this intimate acquaintance and relationship with God that you don't get in just the ordinary perfection. Okay? Now, I told you that Sri Ramakrishna will answer M's third question second, so that's what's happening. M asks, how does one attain God realization, right? That was his third question. Now, Sri Ramakrishna's answer is as follows. But in order to realize God, one must assume one of these attitudes. Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, or Madhur. Shanta, the serene attitude. The rishis of olden times had this attitude toward God. They did not desire any worldly enjoyment. It is like the single-minded devotion of a wife to her husband. She knows that her husband is the embodiment of beauty and love, a veritable Madan. Here, Madan, it's interesting because I don't think anybody who doesn't know Indian languages would even know what Madan is, like a Westerner. And the original Bangla is Kondorpo, Kandarpa. What is Kandarpa?
Cupid.
Cupid. It's the god of love, Kamadeva. Okay. Dasya, the attitude of a servant toward his master. Hanuman had this attitude toward Rama. He felt the strength of a lion when he worked for Rama. A wife feels this mood also. She serves her husband with all her heart and soul. A mother also has a little of this attitude, as Yashoda had toward Krishna. Sakhya, the attitude of friendship. Friends say to one another, come here and sit near me. Sri Dama and other friends sometimes fed Krishna with fruit, part of which they had already eaten, and sometimes climbed on his shoulders. Vatsalya, the attitude of a mother toward her child. This was Yashoda's attitude toward Krishna. The wife, too, has a little of this. She feeds her husband with her very lifeblood, as it were. The mother feels happy only when the child has eaten to his heart's content. Yashoda would roam about with butter in her hand in order to feed Krishna. Madhur, the attitude of a woman toward her paramour. Radha had this attitude toward Krishna. The wife also feels it for her husband. This attitude includes all the other four. Okay, so here, first of all, I have an interesting question for you guys. Actually, this is the first sentence that I had read. But in order to realize God, one must assume one of these attitudes, Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, or Madhur. Let me read the original Bengali here. কিন্তু তাকে লাভ করতে হলে একটা ভাব আশ্রয় করতে হয় শান্ত দাস্য সখ্য বাৎসল্য বা মধুর. I think there's a subtle difference here, but I think it's significant. I think Niklanji makes it seem as if Sri Ramakrishna is giving an exhaustive list of the possible attitudes one can adopt toward God. What are they? The following 5. Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, Madhur. Why exhaustive? Because the way that Niklanji renders it is, one must assume one of these attitudes. But the Bangla is, তাকে লাভ করতে হলে একটা ভাব আশ্রয় করতে হয়. You have to adopt one particular attitude. He doesn't really say these. Okay. Admittedly, in the next sentence, he says, Shanto dasho shokho bachulo ba modhur. He's giving 5, and ba means or modhur. You could push in the direction of an exhaustive list. I don't think it would be accurate to take this as exhaustive. Why? Tell me why this may not be an exhaustive list.
Because there are infinite paths to infinite reality.
And well played, my friend. Quoting Medhananda to Medhananda. He knows the way to my heart. Okay, so
recently somewhere that there were 18 different. There's 18 different
bhavas.
bhavas.
Yeah. The word here is bhava. Well, what are some of the other bhavas?
Parivachalya.
Mm-hmm.
Parivachalya. Right? The bhava of thinking you're God's child, which is not there.
Yeah, it's Shantan bhava.
Yeah, Shantan. Or
Santana
Parivachalya.
bhava.
Ah,
Sri Ramakrishna himself, what was his main attitude? Child. Why does he mention only these 5? Because these are the 5 that you find in Vaishnavism, Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Because in worship of Krishna, you don't think of yourself as a child of Krishna. You think of Krishna as a child, that's Vatsalya. But you don't think of yourself as a child of Krishna. But Sri Ramakrishna himself said on many occasions, Shantan bhav ati shuddha bhav. Santana bhava is the purest of all attitudes. So if this were exhaustive, he'd be excluding his own main attitude, which would be really strange. So no, this is not exhaustive, but this is the standard Vaishnava typology of attitudes. And if you can make the argument that Santana bhava, the attitude of a child toward God, a child of God, may fall under dasya, the servant attitude, but it's not quite the same. And the child doesn't necessarily think that he's serving his mother. I mean, that's a funny way of, child doesn't want to do anything like that. He wants the mother to serve him. So I think it's at least a 6th attitude. And then there are many more. Why only 6, right? There are many. But what's the main point? The idea is, in order to really establish an intimate connection with God, you have to stabilize a particular attitude toward God. Because if you keep flitting around from one thing to another, and one day I'm going to be God's friend, or think of him as my friend, and the next day think of him as my child, and the next day... Some spiritual geniuses can do that. Somebody like Sri Ramakrishna, for instance, who did that. He explored many different attitudes. He was Bhavrajya Raja. Bhavrajya Raja means, this is a term used by Swami Vivekananda to describe Sri Ramakrishna. Bhavarajya Raja. Raja means king. Bhavarajya. In the kingdom of bhavas, of spiritual attitudes, he was the king of all kings. Because most people spend many, many lifetimes just trying to attain mastery in a single attitude, which is what's recommended. That's exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. Don't be a bhava dilettante. Right? But in Sri Ramakrishna's case, he attained perfection in one bhava and then said, that's great, mother, but now I want to experience you in this mood. Because he called himself a glutton in the spiritual field. He's already full, he's satiated, but he can't have enough, and so he'll keep eating. And he wants to enjoy God in many ways. He has a flute. Why should he only play one note on that flute? He wants to play ragas and raginis on the flute. Right? That's vijnana. Because that vijnana allows you to enjoy God and commune with God in so many different ways. That's why also Sri Ramakrishna would say, he said, this is my final opinion, my final view. After all of my spiritual experiences and sadhanas, he says, sometimes I think of myself as a servant of God and God as a master. Sometimes I think of myself as a portion or spark of the divine and God as a whole. And sometimes I think of myself as identical with God. I am He. I am Brahman. And in many places in the Gospel, he attributes this threefold kind of attitude to Hanuman. And there's a famous Sanskrit sloka attributed to Hanuman. Deha buddhya dasosmi. Jiva buddhya twadam shakaha. Atma buddhya tumevaham iti me nishchitamatihi. When I identify with the body, O Rama, Hanuman is telling Rama, then I say I'm your servant. When I identify with the Jivatma, the individual soul, then I say I am a spark of the divine. I'm a portion of you. And when I identify with the non-dual self, I say I am you and you are me. And all of them can be true at different levels of consciousness. And it's not that one negates the other. All of them are true. Why? Because Brahman and Shakti are non-different. If only non-dual Nirguna Brahman was true, only the Soham Bhava would be true, that I am identical with Brahman. But because Shakti is equally real, and Shakti is non-different from Brahman, you can also adopt any devotional attitude toward Shakti, and that relationship is also true. And spiritual geniuses like Sri Ramakrishna can go back and forth. He would say that the Vijnani, just bringing in the different planes of consciousness, here he says is realization between the eyebrows, realization of the personal God. Here, Sahasrara, thousand petal lotus, non-dual Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, the salt all melting in the ocean. He says the Vijnani runs a boat race, as it were, back and forth between the seventh and sixth planes. What a beautiful thing. It means that sometimes he can be completely absorbed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, completely losing external consciousness. The next moment, he's an ecstatic bhakta, seeing God everywhere and in everyone, and also communing with God in a loving relationship, with the personal God, and going back and forth, right? That's the privilege of the Vijnani. Okay, now, I want to open up to some questions. First of all, in person, since you guys took the trouble of actually coming here. Oh, nothing on, I forgot that this is an iPhone recording. Sorry guys, for those of you, we're going to upload this video later because we had technical difficulties. I'm just telling that to the online audience. So the recording quality is not going to be up to the usual standards. We apologize for that. There were technical difficulties on our end that prevented us from doing a proper recording, but we've done our best thanks to the help of some technically proficient audience members. Somebody generously volunteering their phone. So we're recording this on an iPhone and we're going to upload it. So, okay, any in-person questions?
Yeah.
Okay, Nishant has a question.
So Maharaj, you translated Brahma or Shakti Abhed as Brahman and Shakti are non-different rather than inseparable.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about that milk and its whiteness, fire and its heat. Is it better to say that there is one reality which can be looked at from 2 points of view, Nirguna or Saguna? Or isn't it more, I think from a tantric point of view, there is one reality which equally contains at the same time these two somewhat tense poles of Nirguna and Saguna. So is it important whether we say non-different or inseparable, or do they ultimately amount to the same thing?
Okay, great question. The three of us had this conversation, you, me, and Bhajananandaji from Kali Mandir. How do you best translate Sri Ramakrishna's teaching Brahma Shakti Abhed? Brahman and Shakti are Abheda. That's the term in Bangla. What does Abheda mean? At least three possibilities emerge. One is given by Nikhilanandaji. Nikhilanandaji consistently translates Abhed as identical. Brahman and Shakti are identical. I don't like that, to be honest. And the reason is because I think it skews this teaching toward classical Advaita Vedanta, where basically Shakti is nothing but non-dual Brahman. And then you can easily just say, Shakti is non-dual Brahman with the Upadhi, with the limiting adjunct of the personal God or something like that. I don't think that's what Sri Ramakrishna meant. Why? Because of the analogies, some of which you mentioned. This is like fire and its power to burn. Is fire identical to its power to burn? No. That sounds funny. So now, there are two other possibilities. One is inseparable, which I've always favored. But Bhajanji recently, actually, and you too, have kind of made me question this again.
No, I was on the inseparable.
You were on the inseparable. You're supporting me.
Yeah.
Bhajanji and Ambikananji were pushing non-different, I think.
Which you used today.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm just throwing things out there, seeing what sticks. Life wouldn't be fun otherwise. I'm open to, now I'm thinking that maybe non-different could be better in some ways. Bhajanji's argument against inseparable is that it suggests a kind of duality, or that there's a difference, too much of a difference between Brahman and Shakti, and he doesn't like that.
Yeah.
And so he likes non-different better. Now, what is your objection to non-different as a rendering?
Yes, it seems like in the tantric view, you can't say that whiteness is an interchangeable word as milk. The reality of milk means that it has a property of whiteness.
That's true, but non-difference doesn't mean identity, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. So
I think there's a subtle difference between non-difference and identity, and that's why I like non-difference in a
so
way.
it'd be like identity, inseparable, and non-difference.
Yeah, like think about fire's power to burn. They are non-different.
Yeah.
Because you cannot separate fire's power to burn from fire, and yet they're not identical.
Right. I think I was worried about identical.
Yeah, we're both worried about identical,
Yeah.
but I'm kind of leaning toward non-different now as a
Okay,
better
yeah.
translation of Abhed than inseparable.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sort of with Kali Mandir on this.
Yeah,
Okay.
but non-different sounds so identical.
That's what I'm worried about.
I see what you mean. Like non-difference, it's almost like non-duality. It means one, right? So it's
Kevala.
like, yeah. So you have to give it. Well, maybe what we need is a nice scholarly footnote from Ambikanandaji explaining what he means by non-different, right? Add a little asterisk and say, this is what I mean by non-different. It's not classical Advaitic identity. Yeah, okay, other questions?
I have one more about Nikhilanandaji.
Okay, anyone else before we get back to
There
the
were
big
more
mouth?
questions back there.
Okay.
I don't know where they are.
Did somebody have their hand raised? No? No? Anyone want to fight with me about ambition? No? Nobody's itching for a fight? I encourage you.
This is about ambition.
Huh?
This will be about ambition.
Oh, okay, all right. Nish wants to fight with me.
No, it's
No,
not
you
a
don't
fight,
want
but do you remember the letter that Swami Turiyanandaji wrote to Swami Nikhilanandaji about him wanting fame?
Who's him wanting fame?
Nikhilanandaji. And then he told Nikhilanandaji in that letter, I don't have the exact reference, but we were reading it together in the green room, remember? Swami Turiyanandaji. And he told Nikhilananda to go and get fame first, you know,
And then do what?
and then realize God. So I'm wondering if this Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna came about through Swami Nikhilanandaji's alleged
That's interesting.
quest for fame, and if fame, the quest for fame is good because it produces great spiritual works. And then after he did this, he could retire and go have his bath.
Wow, interesting. I never thought about that. We'd have to look at the date of the letter.
Yes, right.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. It reminds me of one of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, Bhoganto nahole tyagashana. You do not feel the true spirit of renunciation, tyaga, until you have bhoganto, until you have passed through the end of enjoyments.
Yeah.
Until you get some taste of certain enjoyments that are very deep. I mean, the minor enjoy, or maybe it's, yeah, I don't know. I was gonna say, I don't know what. You can push it in two directions. Either one direction to push that is the really strong desires for like big things. Better that you avoid them, or go through them once and then try to fulfill them quickly. But with the small desires, they're kind of more innocent. Desire for ice cream, maybe, unless it's like a really big problem. Could be for some people. But then the logic could be on the other way around. It's like, it's the deep desires that are so deep that they're deeply ingrained in samskaras, which make us take birth again and again. And so those things are going to naturally, they're the things that need to be fulfilled in a way. If you have lust, better marry, because it's better that than repression, for instance. And then the minor desires you can work on is kind of like, okay, these are doable. I can be vegetarian, it's not that hard. But that's interesting. What do you guys think about that? Until you have passed through the end of enjoyments, you cannot feel the true spirit of renunciation. How do you interpret that teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, especially in relation to what Turiyaji might have told Nikhilanandaji? Yeah.
It makes me think of, in the context of ambition and in like the workplace, it makes me think of like you might strive to climb the corporate ladder, but like eventually you're gonna age and have to retire. And so if you're attached to that work, if you're doing it for like the fruits of action,
You're gonna suffer.
You're gonna suffer when you age out of it eventually.
Yeah.
Or you can climb the corporate ladder anyway in a detached way, and you can at the end of the day offer everything as sacrifice.
Yeah.
And
And
then
yeah, no, I think that's right.
suffer.
And I think coming back to Nishan's question here, I think the implication behind what you're saying is Turiyanji somehow got the sense that in order for him to do this really monumental task, there needs to be some ego, a little bit of ambition, desire for name and fame. And Turiyanji ran this cost-benefit analysis, said, okay, it's worth it in this case, because he's going to realize God anyway at the end. Let him go through this, produce this monumental work, which will be massively important for all of humanity. And then, so the argument would be like, to do these really giant, kind of gargantuan kind of tasks, maybe you need a little bit of ego. And maybe that's the same logic behind Sri Ramakrishna praying to Divine Mother to keep a little bit of Mahamaya on veiling Swamiji so that he could do this very elaborate work. Because Sri Ramakrishna, he did tremendous work, but it's all sitting on his cot. Or mostly right in his room. Whereas Swamiji had to go throughout the world and fight with Christian missionaries and the British and the this and the scientists and the blah, 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 blah. And you need some rajas. The Theosophists, I mean, who did he not? I mean, he had so many enemies. And then his own disciples turned on him, and my goodness, what a life. Really, it's extraordinary. And so one wonders whether, do you need a little bit of rajas and a little bit of ego maybe to do these really huge tasks? It's an open question. I don't want to say that you do, because I feel that there's a Gita shloka in chapter 18. Mukta sangona hamvadi dhriti utsaha smanvitaha siddhi siddho nidvikaraha karta sattvika uchyate. Krishna is defining the sattvika karta, the sattvika doer of actions, the agent, sattvika agent. What are the qualities? Mukta sangaha, completely free from attachment, either to the work itself or to the fruits of the work. Anahamvadi, devoid of egoism. I'm so great because I do this, I'm better than you, blah, blah, blah. Dhriti utsaha samanvitaha, fully endowed with dhriti, determination, perseverance. I'm going to see this through to the end. And utsaha, full of enthusiasm. Being a karma yogi doesn't mean doing it in a anyway, it's a somewhat not polite thing to say, but in a half-hearted way. That's the play. It doesn't mean do it in a half-hearted way. I'm going to strive for mediocrity. No. Be full of determination, full of enthusiasm for the work. And yet, siddhi siddho nirvikaraha. Be completely indifferent to success or failure. These are the tests of whether you... So now, the same thing. You can be applying for promotion. You can be gunning for a raise. But this is the test. Are you free from attachment to the work and to the fruits of the work? Do you have enthusiasm and determination, but without the egoism? And let's say you don't get the promotion or the salary raise. Does it upset you? These are the questions to ask yourself. And if the answer is no, I'm fine with it either way. It's up to God. I'm serving God. Then you know it's karma yoga and not ambition. Yeah. Mike, please, down there.
I don't know if these are questions or it's just more talk.
Okay.
When you want to go into spiritual life, you tend to cut a lot of distractions, if not all.
Mm-hmm.
So any ambition
Mm-hmm.
outside of spiritual practice is considered, in my understanding, a
Mhm.
distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, you would want to remove any sort of desire of outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going straight,
Yeah.
unless you're pecking here and there and not deciding.
No, I think you're right. But the thing is, the question is, does a desire for promotion, I'm being very concrete here. Let's say you're a professional, you work in a company. Does your desire for promotion count as ambition? And what I'm saying, and I think what Sri Ramakrishna is saying is, it need not.
You need not, but that need is very small.
No. I mean, that's in a different sense. Let me put it in a different English formulation then. It doesn't have to be ambition, because it depends on your inner attitude. So if what's fueling your desire for promotion is to serve God to the best of your ability and to support your
But
spiritually
how would you
oriented
do it
household.
In that sense?
Sorry?
How would you do it in that sense? If you
How to do the action in that sense?
No, let's say your desire for ambition is to serve God.
Mhm.
And for that you're going for a promotion.
Correct.
That means that what you're thinking you're going to get is
What-
what you're thinking you're going to get by that promotion is exactly what?
Well, you'll be getting more money probably, first of all, more responsibility.
Right.
Less
Probably.
time.
More
More time for spiritual
responsibility.
practice.
More time or less time for spiritual practice?
More time for spiritual practice.
Oh, I see. The more responsibility you have, the more time for... Actually, I mean, it depends on how you treat everything, because then the question... Because if you get more responsibility, you have more people working under you, that's more opportunities for spiritual growth in a way. More egos to deal with, to fend with,
So
on top of your own ego, and then...
would you say that then it depends on your real intention and attitude?
That's absolutely what it depends on. That's what I hope I've been saying all along. Exactly. It all depends on your attitude. It's not so much about the external action itself. Look, think about it this way. I'm giving a stark opposite example. We have a beautiful temple here, inner sanctum, spiritually charged. We have a daily puja. Something as quote unquote spiritual as doing puja. What if that pujari, the person doing the puja, is very conscious of being on the camera and wants to impress the people watching the puja so that they can get praise and recognition from them? Isn't that worldly? And so doesn't that so-called spiritual practice become a very worldly thing? And isn't there ambition and ego behind it? Yes. And now, desire for promotion. If what's fueling that is a desire to serve God, and to support a spiritually oriented household, then isn't that more of a spiritual practice than doing puja up here? It all depends on the inner attitude, it seems to me. Keshav has a question.
And one more thing, I just was thinking when you were talking earlier about Gandhi, for example, and his ambition, and how he applied it as a spiritual practice.
His ambition. The thing is, notice, see, ambition, as I said, it's all about how you define the words. I'm defining ambition in a way that kind of disqualifies it as a spiritual practice. A strong desire to do or achieve something. Now, did Gandhi have that? I'm not Gandhi, and you're not Gandhi, so how can we know that? And he's dead now. So we don't know. Now, the thing is, many people think, and he himself said, that he was fighting for India's freedom on a spiritual basis, as a servant of God. If that's true, how can we know that? I don't know, but he's led quite a holy life. If that's true, then that's exactly the kind of thing that Sri Ramakrishna is talking about, because then that means he had a spiritual attitude when he was engaging even in the social activism. Yes, Keshav.
I was thinking of on the lesson of like intention and what's the motive behind one's action, of the teaching where the two friends made different decisions.
Very good.
One went to the temple, the other went out
To a brothel, yeah. I like how you're being polite. Yeah, right, exactly. One goes to a Bhagavata reading, they're reading a very holy scripture, one person, and the other one goes to a brothel, and the one who goes to the brothel is feeling very guilty and like, oh my goodness, what have I done? My friend is doing, like, listening to these holy scriptures, and I'm here doing these very bad things. And he's thinking of God, ironically, in the brothel. But what about the guy in the Bhagavata reading? Oh man, I really missed out this time. I blew it. Why did I not join my friend in the brothel? And so he's listening to scriptures, but his mind is elsewhere. His mind's in the brothel. So that's a very good example. Exactly. This is an example used by Sri Ramakrishna, but that's exactly the same thing. Yes, exactly. You can do something that is externally very spiritually, but internally it's the opposite. And something can be externally very worldly, but the inner attitude could be very spiritual. And some of the most spiritually evolved souls deliberately hide their spirituality behind a mask of apparent worldliness in order to make people think that they're worldly so that they, don't pay them any attention. That's also kind of deterrent. Yes. Okay, let's end with Father Cashin here. Yes, please.
So question on the dictionary definition
of ambition. Mm-hmm.
The desire to achieve or do something,
Mm-hmm.
but in the 4 qualifications to be a sadhaka, the last one is essentially desire for liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry if you've already covered this, but
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be a desire to
Yes.
do or achieve something.
Absolutely.
But it's as it were like a desireless desire in terms of having anything worldly, non-spiritual to do with it.
This is also Himajat's question, right, earlier. It's the desire that ends all desires. It's the desire that puts an end to all desires, something like that. Sri Ramakrishna also gives the example of their, what's the exact analogy he uses?
All sweets produce acidity, but sugar candy does not.
Correct. He says, yes, all the kinds of sweets, except for one, produces acidity, which is a bad thing. So you shouldn't eat them. So those are like worldly desires. And he says, except for mishri jol. There's a special kind of water which you mix with sugar candy, which does not give you acidity. And so he says, desire for bhakti, desire for God, desire for liberation, that's like the sugar candy water.
It actually cures acidity.
It cures acidity. Is that what he says? Oh, wonderful. So that is the perfect analogy. It's the desire that ends all worldly desires, right? Yeah, the spiritual desire that ends all worldly desires. Thank you for that. Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was quite a crowdsourcing kind of class, and I appreciate it. See you next Wednesday, I hope. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you.
Jai Mari.